This that new media company covering everything. I'm talking that news you ain't heard, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters, we should rise and fall together, and that's why here at Progressive.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday and Hair of the Dog. This is our Friday edition. This is typically a lot looser in many ways than our regular show. But good morning to everyone in Greensboro. We are streaming live to the DLF page, Digital Liberation Front. We are also on our Facebook page, Progressive Insider, on Twitter, and now streaming to the National Progressive Party page as well. So welcome everyone, and if this is your first time tuning in, if you type in the comments, 9 times out of 10 we can see them depending on how you're viewing the show. So we do encourage you to participate, ask questions, comments, critiques, complaints, whatever. Go ahead and send those in and be part of the program. So good morning and welcome to lovely Andy Kennedy joining us from Canada. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning, Carrie. How are you?
I'm sleepy.
You're sleepy.
I actually slept in, but it was not a restful sleep. As I understand it, I am a terrible roommate. So my husband kept nudging me.
Oh, you're one of those.
Yeah, he kept nudging me. He's like, I don't know what your problem is, but you're loud. Roll over. So needless to say, neither one of us got a whole lot of sleep. So
I know, and I've always really kind of had an issue with that. Okay, you're giving someone who is unconscious shit because they're making a noise, right? It's kind of like yelling at someone for bleeding.
well, exactly, and I get that maybe I was snoring a little loud, but why do I have to suffer with you? I mean, what woke me up is he called a nudge. It was hard enough to wake me up out of a sound sleep, and I remember waking up and grabbing his hand, like I thought I was gonna have to fight somebody. And he's like, "Oh, it was a gentle nudge." I'm like, nobody. It was not.
Good thing shotguns don't fit under the pillow.
Right, exactly. So, so I'm a little sleepy, but it's totally fine. It's Friday. Yay.
Exactly. How did you call it? Loose Friday?
Loose Friday, because I'm trying to clean up our act a little bit. It used to be the Friday.
Yes, I understand. As opposed to tight Monday and tight Wednesday.
Everything, as you get a little older, things just kind of loosen up on you.
Sure. Yes, you grow hair out of places you didn't before, and I know, I got it.
Exactly.
I live that every day.
Yeah. So, what's going on with you, Andy? What do you have on the agenda today? I have a couple things that I want to talk about. They're a little dry, but hopefully.
In terms of the show, I was going to talk about the house cleaning I was going to do, but as far as the show is concerned, I just wanted to start out today just giving a bit of a shout out to the new National Progressive Party. That's now using us as the preferred media source, and we're very excited about this group because Ellie Spahn is the person that is driving it now, and she is years of experience as a dedicated activist and knows the ropes, and we're taking the model of the Vermont Progressive Party, which is actually a legitimate official party in the United States, and duplicating that 49 times, and setting up charters and getting off the ground with volunteers and pushing forward. And so that's the one thing that I think that has really lacked in the progressive movement is the lack of leadership and a direction. Right? I've always said that this progressives are all in this really, really long boat. Everybody has an oar. We just don't know when to row at the same time.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, because we're kind of, it's like herding cats, really. Herding, H-E-R-D, herding cats. But to your point, one of the things that I really liked that Ellie did was we all had this concept of we need a new major party because I think it has now become painfully obvious that the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership are just two sides of the same coin. One's a gentler, kinder um, way to ask people to die through neoliberal policy, and the other one is just kind of screw you, go ahead and die. So it there was a gaping hole in a collective of people who believe the same things and will actually support progressive candidates instead of fighting candidates, right? So, myself as a progressive candidate within the Democratic Party, I had no idea that the people who were smiling in my face were going to stab me in the back. This was 2016. I was naive, right? I was thought we're all Dems, big tent. Big tent does not necessarily include progressives. So if you're a candidate in the Democratic Party, kudos to you. You are fighting on two fronts. You're fighting Republicans and the Democratic Party. But for those who choose not to do that and want to be surrounded by people who support the same policies and will support them as candidates, because it's hard work running a campaign, then you absolutely need a party and an apparatus that is strong enough and widespread enough to help you. And this is why I gotta give kudos to Ellie, because the whole thought process was, well, let's just do it, not recognizing that there are some pretty significant legal pieces that have to be done in order to make sure that this is a viable effort. You can't just run out and do it. You have federal and state laws that you have to adhere to. So she's taken a whole lot of time to piece through this and working with a group of attorneys to make sure that it's legal, it's sound, and get the legs, get the foundation right so that it can be rolled out on a state by state basis and duplicated per state law, which 50 states, 50 sets of laws and ballot access things. So shout out to NPP for getting it right, taking the time
Right.
to do it.
And exactly, and the other thing that we say as progressives is there's absolutely two things that we have to include in our charter and our the morality that we exude every time that we deal with, and that number one is inclusivity, that we include all people, we include every single person from the all races, all the gender, both genders, all genders, ethnicities. It's a one big group, and that has to be the case. And the other thing is that if we're going to point at the 1A and 1B party and say, you're corrupt, you do this, you do that, then we, as the third party, always have to look at what we do in the mind of taking the high road and being above board and being, doing things because it's the correct thing to do and the proper thing to do and the right thing to do, right? And that in itself is a huge order, because without really any kind of organizational vehicle in place, you're going to have bad actors that call themselves progressives, but are really just looking out for number one. And those people have to be identified and can't be in a position of a place where they're making decisions, because that's the corruption that we all scream about, that we can't portray in our own party.
Oh, absolutely. Right. So if, bad data in, data out, and the same thing goes for behavior, right? So and I want to go back to something you said and kind of give a plug for what we're doing here. The reason why we have a relationship with NPP as well as some other progressive organizations is we are leveraging our talents and our technology to support that. So Ellie had a weekly update that we were able to produce and host for her. And this is what we do as a progressive company, making sure that our candidates, policy, education, all of these things come forward. So I would encourage other progressive groups or efforts to do the same thing. So this is kind of a call out to the big ones like Sunrise Movement. We're with you, and I get that you've got to play in this narrow space to get Democrats to listen to you, but when you get tired of being thrown out of Pelosi and Feinstein's offices, we're here to support you, and we're here to elevate that message to make sure that Feinstein and Pelosi get what they deserve for throwing kids out of their office who are just begging for a chance at life. So we are
And
here
not even offering them ice cream.
right, of the $20,000 worth of refrigerator and ice cream. So yeah, exactly. So this is why we do what we do here, and we encourage others to do it as well, because people on the left, the center and the left, have such a hard time, like you said, your analogy, rowing in the same direction, because we all have things that we are passionate about, and we tend to get caught up and mired in those personal pursuits that meander every which way, and we have a hard time
In
focusing.
the minutia,
Exactly.
which was, the word was made after, that government official, Steve Minutia.
No, that is not his name. But good call out. So on that note, let's talk about candidates, Andy.
All right.
Yeah. Trying to get my thoughts together. Not enough caffeine this morning, but so there are a number of people who are running for president, and some of them are running independent. Some of them are you're not going to know. Like the last cycle, we had like 300 people running for president, but because they're not in one of the major parties or party, Democrat, Republican, you didn't know about them. So there's Howie, who's running on the Green Party ticket. Green Party primarily focuses on the top of the ticket, and now they're starting to trickle down a little bit into congressional races. But then libertarians have been running candidates all up and down the ballot, and they have a presidential candidate as well. Her name is Jo Jorgensen. So Andy, you pulled this one. You sent this to me last night, and so I started doing a little bit of peeking into this. So here is Jo. Jo got into a little bit of a funny area. So remember when Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan's podcast, and
Yes.
the Hillary wing, the third way people flipped their shit. Like, oh my God, how does he do this? Go on Joe Rogan's show. Well, here's the libertarian candidate. So this is Jo. And Jo, okay, so as a candidate, you're going to have a hard time getting media coverage if you're not one of the anointed ones. So I get that she decided to go on this podcast. It's a libertarian podcast. Well, here's the thing, right? So she goes on this podcast that that's tied to the Boogaloo Boys. And we've talked about the Boogaloo Boys here on this show. These are the ones who, the Boogaloo is their word for civil war, and they're trying to start another civil war.
Yes, but basically you just call it a race war.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all out racist. The words are hard today, so sorry. But it's nationalistic, alt-right white supremacy, right? And so some of the members actually were just arrested for murdering law enforcement officers. And some of these are also under indictment from the FBI because they were using the Black Lives Matter protest as a cover for rioting and escalating tensions, right? So she goes on this podcast, and I went out to look. I checked out their Facebook page. Most of it is pretty, yeah, it's, I don't want to say innocuous, but it's predictable. But then, yeah, there's absolutely some overtones of white supremacy and overthrow the government with some really strong ties to alt-right, Breitbart, all of the, gay frogs, chemtrails, and German Nazi Party. So there's, if you go to their website, which I hate to promote them, but yeah, they've got articles from Nazi Party members from all over the world.
And I'm pretty sure that, I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that she's got a pretty good rating from the NRA.
Oh, absolutely. She's talking about getting rid of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. That's the FBI ATF. Because in her words, she says that she would get rid of unconstitutional laws. So that always raises a red flag to me. If a law has been on the books for more than 2 decades and it's unconstitutional and nobody's challenged it, really? I kind of question that. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to do a deep dive into this particular candidate, but I think it's a good lesson into you've got to do your homework, because on the surface, there are some things some policies that Joe says she supports, and I'm like, okay, all right, yeah, sounds pretty good. And then you start to peel under it. So we've done this with Joe Biden. Obviously, we can see Trump, where his words and his actions are disparate. So I was going to go through a whole list, but it's Friday. So I stumbled upon this particular individual on Twitter who already did the homework and broke it down. So I want to share that real quick because it's hilariously snarky and funny and uses her own quotes. So this was from Frosty on Twitter. And Frosty posted just took screenshots of Joe's comments and her own little Q&A. And she's like, should the government stop construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline? No. Oh, okay. Really? Because it was just shut down. Do you support the use of nuclear energy? Yes. Should corporations, unions, and nonprofit organizations be allowed to donate to political parties? Yes. Should government make cuts to public spending in order to reduce the national debt? Yes. Oh, Joe doesn't understand how money works. Great. Let's put another person in office like that. Should transgender athletes be allowed to compete in athletic events? No.
Why?
She doesn't specify.
Ah.
So should the U.S. raise or lower the tax rate for corporations? Lower. It's like 21% now. So how much lower should corporations go, right? And remember she said that because we're going to touch on some taxes here in a minute. But should immigrants be required to learn English? No, but remove multilingual translations from government documents and services. Huh, really?
Yeah, because it makes them cumbersome.
Right. This was funny. So should the government increase funding for mental health research and treatment? No. Well, then you wouldn't have a whole lot of libertarians left. You did. I just loved this whole compilation, and Frosty actually has a number of them on his Twitter account, and it's beautiful to me. So shout out to Frosty on that one, because first of all, kept me from having to do a whole lot of work. Second, it's hilarious because there is no better pushback than the words of the candidate themselves. right? So we do it to
Is
Trump all
that
the
is
time.
that Frosty T Snowman?
No, but that would have been great. That would have
Oh,
been.
I would have. Yes.
That would have made.
Happy birthday!
It's I will get it right. So a proper accreditation. It's at the Frosty Mac, MAC.
Frosty Mac.
Yes,
Okay.
at the
That's like
Frosty Mac.
you put a McDonald's burger in the freezer.
Which would be disgusting. Don't do it.
Well, it would continue to be disgusting.
Well, there's that. Yeah, it's one of those things where okay, so everybody's eating it because you don't get to 2 billion served, but everybody you eat it and you just feel dirty and bad afterwards. Like, why did I do that to myself? So yeah, yay McDonald's. But shout out to the Frosty Mac on that. Check out their Twitter feed because they've got tons of this, and there's no better sourcing than publicly available information, or in this case, the candidate's own comments. So Joe is wow, she's like in the Steve Miller Trump camp of white nationalism and alt-right stuff. So shout out to you, Joe, for being so here's the thing with white nationalists. If you've got nothing else that separates and defines you other than the color or the lack of melanin in your skin, that's sad. If that's really what you're going to fall back on, you've had too many participation ribbons growing up, I think. So do better. So on the tax front, there were a couple of reports that came out yesterday, but first, Supreme Court ruled that Trump can no longer hide his tax returns. So now what was interesting is the Supreme Court said that Congress doesn't get access to them just because they want them, but the Circuit Court in New York can. So this is something that has been in the works for a while, and for some reason there was a gentleman in the Ways and Means Committee who just kind of sat on it for 9 months, didn't really do shit. Well, it finally went through, and the Supreme Court just ruled and said, yeah, oh yeah, hand those tax returns over. So I don't know, Andy, your thoughts on, like, if I'm going to run for president, should my tax returns be available?
Normally, yes. The current occupant of the Oval Office, what are they going to do? I think that there's a body of work here that speaks for itself, that all of the current players that are in play are protecting him, and it really doesn't matter because his base, are illiterate, and it's really not. The only thing that's going to now happen because of this is basically Fox News is going to point to it and say, look, he didn't do anything, and CNN and MSNBC are going to point to it and say, Russia, Russia, Russia. And that's where it'll go.
Right, more of a distraction. So AOC posted on her Twitter. She reminded us all of the hearing and the Q&A that she had with Michael Cohen, where she was asking very specific, pointed questions about tax treatment and tax rebates that were provided to the Trump organization for golf courses and things like that. So what struck me in watching that again and then looking at this report that we're going to talk about here in a minute is there are so many tax loopholes already, right? So the corporate tax rate here in the United States is below 30%. That's the real tax rate. But then when you start adding in all of the deductions and things like that, the actual tax rate is about 20-21%. So it's lower than what I as an individual pay. So on top of that, you have these allegations that Trump and others have just gone overboard with, like, Trump was devaluing his own assets to get a lower tax rate. So what that would look like is when my house gets tax assessed, I fight the value of it. So, let's say my house is valued at 160,000, and I would go and bring reports and values to the auditor and say, look, no, 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 my house isn't 160,000, it's 130,000. So tax me at that rate. And so that's kind of what he did over and over and over again. So what they're looking at is, was that legal? Was he defrauding the government, state and local, of tax revenue? And I hate to, it's not right, but it happens over and over and over again. Like, my own county board member had a homestead exemption and a farm credit because he had 2 chickens in his backyard, right? So he got like $1,500 off his tax bill, whereas the rest of us had to pick up what he wasn't paying because the bill didn't go down for the county. So it's this whole idea of get what you can when you can, and yeah, it just makes no sense. So oh, we have a comment on Facebook. This is transparency to show that a leader is not profiting through position. Almost sounds constitutional, right? So yeah, there's the pushback. Are you in a position where you are profiting from the laws and the votes that you participate in? And we've already seen where, like, the COVID relief, the CARES Act, there are all these articles coming out about the payroll protection going to people in both parties, Democrat and Republican, and their associates who just happen to know them are getting this money. In fact, there was a Democratic candidate who requested the money for her campaign down in Texas, has since repaid it. But if you're not in the know, apparently you're not going to get the money that was sent out. So it's the same thing, that you don't have this arbitrary conflict of interest in taking your vote. So I don't know. But so David Sirota, he put out this paper. He does a Substack now. So David Sirota, if you don't recall, he was working with the Sanders campaign, and he's been a journalist for a number of years, author, journalist. So he took a look at 2 tax reports that came out in the same time that the Supreme Court ruling came out. So, and what they identified is it's actually more than $1 trillion tax cheat. $1 trillion was all they could identify. There's actually more that they believe is going on, and this is per year. So this is where corporations who are already paying 20, 21% are sending actually more of their revenue to these tax havens, so that their tax rate is actually lower than even what it's supposed to be. So the CBO in the United States Congressional Budget Office, this is a nonpartisan group of economists that work in the federal government, found that between 2011 and 2013, $381 billion of taxes went unpaid every single year. So that's non-payment, in addition to what's going to tax havens. So there were 2 different reports that David Sirota put out in his write-up. So the first was the CBO report, and we'll post a link later today. So if you want to read it, you can read it. There's a nice summary usually in the CBO reports, and they do nice charts and they provide their data. So while you and I have to pay our taxes, or we go to jail, I lose my house, all of these things, corporations aren't paying it. And we're not talking about the 98% of small businesses. We're talking about the big ones that got the bailouts and all of those sort of things. So they're taking that money and using tax havens. So
right, and not to mention the corporations that go into right to work states and negotiate a deal where they they can get tax breaks, so that they don't have to pay any taxes at all, just in order to put people to work at minimum wage in those states, right? It was Pavlina Chernova that said just recently that the state of New Jersey paid, I think it was Amazon for one of their warehouses, between $4 and $5 billion to set up in that state, and that money would have paid for a job at a living wage for every unemployed person in the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, and all of it went to this one company. So it's interesting you bring up the right to work states. Like, I don't live in a right to work state. I live, it's an at-will employment situation. But I posted a question on my Facebook page yesterday just to kind of see the temperature of this. So the question was, in our non-right to work state, 12 hours or $12 an hour, 12-hour work shifts, 6 days a week. This is an actual job and schedule requirement. So every day you would get every week you would get Sunday off. That's it. And then the rest of the week you would clock in and work 12 hours in manufacturing. So that is equal to 72 hours in your work week every week, week over week over week, for the foreseeable future, at least a year, 2 years, if not more. And I posed that question just to kind of see what the response would be. And it was interesting to me that a lot of people seemed to be okay with it. And I was like, okay, that's interesting to me, because to me that is that's how you kill people, by working them on that schedule. But the pushback that not pushback, but the feedback that I got was, well, they'll get overtime. Okay. So economically, to your point, Andy, in order to make this job a livable wage, you must compromise your life to get to that economic standing where it is a livable wage, but you're not living anywhere other than at your job.
Exactly, right? And the other thing is, what are the benefits that come with that? Because if we're talking, $12 an hour, then chances are you're not going to be able to have any real affordable health care. And if you're working 72 hours mandated per week, you're going to need your health care.
Oh, no, there's no benefits. No benefits with this job either. And that's the part that kind of blew my mind. People were looking at this like it was okay. And then one person did ask, is that legal? And here's the scary part. Yes, it is. Absolutely. You are only required to give somebody a 1-hour break over X number of hours of work. There is nothing for an employer to say you will work 22 hours or more during a work day.
Because everybody needs a healthy 2 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Per day.
Right. And that's how the law works. And I am not in a right to work state. So as an employer, if I can find someone who's willing to do that, it's totally legal. I can do it.
And that is why when we talk about, as progressives and progressive policies, why a federal jobs guarantee, and we compare that to a UBI, which Andrew Yang was pushing for, and had lots of people that were saying, well, yeah, that's much better than a job guarantee. What you're doing with a job guarantee is you are setting the floor of the lowest amount of money that you will make as an employee in the country, right? So that is the social safety net. So you set social safety net in terms of wage and benefits, right? And let's say that it's $20 an hour. I think it should be more like $25 or $30 an hour, but let's just say $20 an hour for now. And basic health care, right? That you're going to be the employer of last resort in the country, right? That is, we know the government can afford it. If they can afford to give $10 trillion to keep the stock market liquid during a pandemic, they can afford to pay for this, right? And so you've got all of these unemployed people that are now guaranteed a job, 40 hours or 32 hours or however many hours it's deemed that is a work week at $20 an hour with benefits, right? So you get employers like this employer that you're talking about here that demands 72 hours at $12 an hour, and that's mandated.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell all of them to shove it up their ass, because why would I work for you when I can go work in a job guarantee doing what I want,
Mm-hmm.
helping my area, my region, my county with whatever I'm good at for this amount of money? So you're now saying to this guy, look, if you want employees, you're going to have to pay at least that amount with benefits, and a normal work week. Or why would anybody go work for them if the job guarantee is a better proposition?
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And with
That's
the
why it's so
job,
important.
for our libertarian friends, and for our conservative friends, what the federal job guarantee does is, first of all, we need to understand that the free market is created by regulation, right? It is not Wild West or anything like that. The government is supposed to protect the market from monopolies, which it hasn't been doing, because our conservative friends have been rolling back those regulations repeatedly so that they could create these big monopolies that would fund their campaigns, and then now we're in an oligarchy, right? So that is the gradual transition. But this whole concept of the free market is created by these regulations. And the federal job guarantee is just one more regulation, like you said, that creates that floor. It adds in the morality that we as a people are looking out for each other. And that it costs me more as a taxpayer to fund welfare benefits for Walmart employees than to require Walmart to act responsibly, right? So this is part of what the federal job guarantee does, is it helps guide behaviors so that we are investing in each other, we're investing in our country, and we are making headway towards preparing for the future in an economic framework of business and competition. Pretty
Exactly.
simple stuff. So
Right.
what has happened though is, like, this job. This is an actual job that was offered to someone that I happen to know here in Illinois, a non-right to work state, and nobody flinched when I mentioned this. So this is part of the reason why I look at the comparison of what the American worker is used to, and then compare it to other industrialized first world countries. And it's staggering to think that, okay, here's where we are, America. Our borders have been closed. Our people are dying from a pandemic that is easily controllable. If I wanted to go somewhere now as an American, my passport's useless. No one will take me. We are literally working ourselves to death. Our life expectancy has declined. Access to healthcare has declined. Our median income has declined. We're a shithole country now. And when I posted this, I don't know what I expected. I guess I thought that some people would be like, that's not right. But I really wasn't getting that pushback. So it just was staggering to me that this is kind of we, for so long, for 40 years at least, we have been conditioned to accept the yoke of what is happening. And we are going right back to the robber baron era of the turn of the century, the prior century, not 1999, but it's just staggering that is what we're willing to put up with. So getting back to this tax thing, while I am working myself to death and paying taxes that corporations are not paying, there was this organization that put, this is where the data came from David Sirota's piece. And what struck me about this is from the Tax Justice Network, and on Twitter they're Tax Justice Net. What was interesting about it was this is a group that I want to say 5 to 6 years ago had come up with these tax policy proposals that the UK, the US, Germany, all of these countries said, oh, no, these are impractical. We can't possibly do it. So they did it themselves in aggregating the data to show and highlight how much money is being lost in tax havens. So they had published their report, and this is where David Sirota got it from. So when you look at the cost of tax havens, and here's where it gets interesting, because on a federal level, if you have a fiat currency, spending is a little bit different. But here in Illinois, I cannot create US dollars for spending. I must raise taxes to do that. So this is where the cost comes down, the cost comes down, trickle down. This is where it actually works. So in the Netherlands, the costs where some of these things are going across, you can see the chart I'm looking at here on the top right. The red is the cost, the blue is the gains. So in the UK, from Hong Kong to Switzerland, the US, Ireland, who made themselves one of the tax havens of the entire world, because we did a report on AbbVie and Abbott Labs here in Illinois, and they were taking advantage of Ireland's tax havens. It cost Ireland more to operate that way than they are actually bringing in. Cayman Islands was featured during the Panama Papers, if you recall. The Panama Papers, and it's noted here, outed the wealthy as well as corporations for doing these tax havens, right? So we had celebrities, we had politicians, we had all of these people taking advantage, and they were outed in the Panama Papers and the Credit Suisse scandals in Switzerland. So it's just amazing to me that these people who are supposed to be the scions of finance and economics, who are advocating these things, and then the results, when data doesn't lie, when the data comes out from a group like this that shows that it costs you more to be sketchy than it would if you just did things the right way. That's theft. We are literally being raped by these people in economic thievery. They're raiding our treasuries.
Mhm.
How do you justify that in any political philosophy whatsoever? I don't. Our buddy Lee Howerton, he is with Digital Liberation Front, and he's got this. I'm going to read his comment. It's a long one. Good morning, Lee. He says, in North Carolina, if you work 16 hours in a 24-hour period, there's a mandated off time before you're allowed to come back to work. I believe it's 10 hours. And he said when he was working security, he worked 4 10-hour shifts a week scheduled. And they were only allowed to come in 5 hours early or stay 5 hours late, so they could legally work in the next scheduled shift. So let's pause here. He's talking about North Carolina, right? I live in Illinois. If you live in the United States and I say Illinois, you think blue state. If I say North Carolina, you think red state. Whoa, what happened to the policy here? And this is where I'm going to go back to, we have the leader of the Republican Party openly bragging about running Republicans as Dems here in Illinois. And then in my own county party and across the state, We have leaders of the Democratic Party who are socializing, having lunch, deciding who can run, who is not going to run, asking people to step down. I did a full report on our candidates who were bullied, coerced, harassed, their children threatened by members of the Democratic Party if they didn't step down and let the Republican win. So if you think there are two parties,
I didn't see that on mainstream media.
And you won't. You won't. I got into an argument with my stepmother yesterday because she is a Republican who's now crossed over into the Biden camp, but she was doing some really nice, I'm pretty sure she's got a little altar set up to Rachel Maddow now. And she was forwarding all of these memes. I'm like, look, I want you to understand, Rachel Maddow is a multimillionaire. And the policies that she's going to advocate for have nothing to benefit regular people because she's not paid to. And she got mad at me. She's like, well, you just hate her because she's a millionaire. I'm like, no, not at all. I could care less because she's not paying my bills. She's not one of my 3 Fs. Don't give a shit. But you need to understand the message that she's giving you, she's being paid to give you. Like, for example, Rachel Maddow is one of those people who says a program like Medicare for All is shit. And the reason why is $270 billion in ad revenue from big pharma and insurance companies goes to MSNBC and corporate media. Rachel Maddow's salary requires her to adhere to the corporate narrative to say that Medicare for All is not going to work because they're worried about their ad revenue. And once I explained this to her, her whole thing was, well, I've got Medicare and I'm fine.
Yep. I don't care about the rest of the world. As long as I'm good, fuck you.
Okay, so Lee followed up. He said the total amount of wealth being kept in tax havens by wealthy Americans, just Americans alone, is $32 trillion. All right, Lee, if you've got a link to that, or if you can recall where you saw that, I would appreciate that because I'd like to look into that just a little bit more. So this is part of, everything goes back to the critical thinking that we stress here. So whether it's your candidate who's this awesome libertarian and she's a woman, and the one thing I'll give her is she is a presidential candidate who's not been accused of rape or a sexual assault. So
yes, that's great, but that's our standard now, isn't it?
I'm kind of like, there were a couple of towns now that it used to be cute. There was one, but now I think there's 2 or 3 that has elected a dog as mayor. I'm like, I kind of see that now. That's where we're at. That's right.
That's right. The mayor does something good for that city that they're mayor of, and the council sits around and says, "Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy?"
See, that's a meeting I would totally tune in for. But instead, I have batshit Tea Partiers who are stealing from my township, and it's just.
We can take that. We can take that as an example, right, for other mayors, and if they do things good for society, it says, "Okay, here's a treat."
Yeah, exactly. Just have a little jar on the desk there.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's almost the level that we need to get to, right? Where you have to go over the top if somebody does something halfway decent and human, that you would really have to. You did such a good job, such a great. And women who are married, you know this trick. You know this trick because if you're. This is so sexist. This is so wrong, and I know people are going to at me on this one, but when you're young and married, and this doesn't necessarily have to be male, female, but when you're young and married and you're trying to figure out how to guide behaviors in the right way, you learn that you have to go over the top and stroke that ego for little things like, oh my goodness, he took out the garbage. Wow, he washed a dish. Even though you yourself have washed 400 dishes, wash that one dish. Oh my, yay! how wonderful. So we need to do the same thing with our politicians, right? So I know that we come down on people like, okay, let me walk that back because in my head a picture of Nancy Pelosi popped in and I can't even. I just
No, the ultimate fail. Oh no.
I'm just like, what I would say is let's all have a nice little let's do a social media push, retire Nancy, and start giving her brochures about where she could spend all of her, what is that, $21 million or whatever, 121 million. Um, Here's where you could retire, Nancy, and this would be great. You have enough money where even your great grandkids will not have to work. Don't worry. Just retire.
Can you imagine if we could get progressives to hire someone to stand at the side of a press conference and say, okay, here we go. Nancy's about to announce some neoliberal policy or program, and you have somebody standing at the side, who wants ice cream?
That's exactly
I'll be right back.
right. It's got to be chocolate though to help her out. Or you almost want like the Dave Chappelle where they had the ESPN style commentators doing it. I just want two progressives to really give the play by play on what she's doing because it's all of it is insane. All of everything that is going on is absolutely insane, and I think it just. I hate to keep saying it, but the silver lining in all of that we've gone through, it feels like years, but it's only been 3.5, 4 years through the Trump presidency is the veil is gone now, right? We always suspected that there were some massive problems, but now it is so blatant and so transparent that we can actually see as Americans, and I liken it to the analogy of you're standing at the bottom of a pit and you're looking up and you realize, well, what we thought is law and order and a nation of laws and justice isn't for me because I can't afford it. I can't reach that high. And the when we talk about American values, what we have to acknowledge is this country is founded and nurtured off of slave labor and always has been. So this is why you have all of the prison labor. This is why you have waves upon waves of immigrants that we demonize, but we need for our own survival. And this is why you can credibly put out a job for $12 an hour, mandatory 72 hours a week. So all of these things now are just so clear and so blatant that all you have from a consultant standpoint when you talk about your candidate is better than that guy. And that's where we are.
Yep, absolutely. We have to understand that you being well off or comfortable and the rest of society is not a policy, right? I mean, people, even and we know that the number one religion in the world right now is greed. It has nothing to do with Christianity or any other religion in the world. It's greed, right? That's what basically runs the world. And if you're one of those people that is driven by the acquirement of things, right, and power, right? Mm-hmm. It's not. You have to step back and understand that you're lacking in a morality, and empathy for other people. Mm-hmm. But even if you suffer from that, right, you don't even realize that as the bottom of society lifts up, that makes life better for you too, right? That makes your life a more rich experience if everyone is brought up from the bottom. Mm-hmm. Right, and people don't see that because they're blind in their own little world, and their own little, false narrative of thinking that I'm going to be happy if I have things and money, right? Without looking at the bigger picture about what we talk about. When, since the Beatles have said, money can't buy me love, we as a society, and this was just a story with, on the rise, right? Where we're talking about the happiness index and what makes people happy and who are the people in society that are happy. But the gauge for happiness was, not having to go broke for health care, right? Not being so destitute that you can't feed your family, right? That's not happiness. That's survival, right? We're looking at the fact that you have health insurance and you can eat, right? And you can provide for your family as happiness. That's not happiness. Happiness is the fulfillment that you get from a life well lived, right? A morals code that you've done good, that you've left the world a better place than it was when you entered it, right? If we're talking about happiness, that's true happiness. That has nothing to do with money. But if that's the gauge now, that if you could survive, you're happy, then that speaks so horribly for our society that we don't even know what happiness is.
Well, I think you've touched on something before, right? So, and this is my working theory for why this is happening, because there's no logic to it. But when we look at addictive personalities and they engage in behavior that is not healthy for them, they still get that pleasure response from doing it, right? And that is the nature of addiction. You're not doing it out of habit. You are actually getting something. The brain chemistry changes to adhere to that thing. So whether it's gambling addiction or whatnot, in this case, it is the pursuit of money. The greed is an addiction. So this is why we tend to go to the stock market performance as a measure, because that is a measure of greed at that higher level. And when we as a society look at somebody like Trump, like, you remember when Trump was running, candidate Trump, the number one thing that people said was, well, he's a successful businessman and I want to be like that. Or my stepmother saying, well, you're mad at Rachel Maddow because she's a millionaire. You're jealous. So it is all of this coddling and pushing people towards the greed, right? So if you've ever been around an addict, one of the behaviors that they engage in is trying to get you to emulate their behavior to make it acceptable, right? So if I'm an alcoholic or I'm taking heroin, I will use words and behavior to try and get you to join me in that. And that way you're not going to criticize me, and in fact you may actually join me at the level that I am at, and we can do this together. And so this is what we have this culture of greed. It's not, we always hear about the US as a culture of death. No, death is a symptom of the problem of unchecked greed. And
Yes, it is.
So our entire program today was about money and the effects thereof, the greed for it. So we are now, I'm totally depressed now. We're at the top of the hour.
Yes, oh well.
Yeah, so for those of you who are seriously considering that a 72-hour work week is okay, one thing I would suggest for you is set a timer, your normal work day, and then go 12 hours and put your alarm on. So what will happen is, if you regularly get off at 5 p.m., your alarm will go off at like 8 or 9 p.m. to tell you, oh, you would have still been working. And then make sure you set that alarm for 6 days of the week so that you can really get a sense of what it is that you said was okay. When we talk about greed and the need to survive and what is happiness, What you are saying is that 72 hours is fine to put someone in a position where they need that to survive, and their pursuits for reading, painting a picture, taking a walk, visiting with family, all of those things no longer matter.
Yeah, you just physically don't have the time to do it.
Right.
You know,
Exactly. Never mind sleep.
it's more important for you to go die doing something for somebody else so they can make profit and give you peanuts, basically.
That's
That's
exactly
it.
right. So some things to consider. So my plans today is finish up doing some work, and then I am gonna go hit my $50 pool that it took me months to save up for. I have a pop-up pool, and I'm going to have some rum and lime today and just contemplate what happiness is. So
Right, exactly. And I would just finish off by saying that one of my favorite sayings is that when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you have to do is stop digging. America, do I have to hide the shovels?
please, please come hide our shovels. You're so far gone. So on that note, thank you for everyone who tuned in and everyone who provided your comments. We weren't able to get to all of them, but I am always amazed at how intuitive and intelligent these comments are that come in, and the dialogue that happens, particularly on social media around these topics. I think these are things we need to talk about more. So also, as Andy mentioned at the beginning of the show, check out the National Progressive Party and all the wonderful things that are starting to happen there and happen in the right way. If you want to check out any of our other broadcasts, do so. And then last night we premiered part one of a two-part series on Dan Whitfield, who is running against Tom Cotton in Arkansas. So that is a race to watch. And you talk about corruption, oh boy. Yeah, Tom Cotton has got all of the decision makers in his pocket. And this is the same guy, to remind everybody, that he was the one who was advocating for our military to fire upon unarmed citizens. Thought that was totally okay. So
Yes. You look up if you go online and look at Wikipedia and look up Tom Cotton, it says "see batshit crazy."
Exactly. So that's all that we have for today, and we will be back here bright and early on Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern, with lots of great content, and give you kind of a rundown of what happened on over the weekend, what's coming for the week, and as well as your thoughts, comments, and commentary. So thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Take care.